Welcome to my review of the final episode of The Last of Us. Overall, this was a pretty solid finale episode for the series, and it did everything it needed to do in wrapping up the season and completing Joel and Ellie's journey together. The performances of the actors were excellent all around, and aside from a few minor changes and adding in the backstory of Ellie's mum, this episode was pretty much a one-for-one adaptation of the cutscenes from the game. My only complaint about this episode is that, like the previous one, it should have been longer, I think. The whole thing felt pretty rushed, and there wasn't enough time to breathe and to fully take in everything and absorb what the characters were going through, the choices they were faced with, and the decisions they ultimately made. I think in particular, the hospital scene was way too quick. It all happened so fast that it ended up feeling quite anticlimactic for a finale episode, and I was left feeling a little bit unsatisfied, like I was thinking, that's it? And that's what we've been building up to this entire season. I think the reason why this sequence worked so well in the game, but left me kind of wanting in the show, is because in the game, everything that happens is a lot more drawn out. Because, of course, you have the cutscenes, which were in and of themselves really amazing for a game, and the creators were able to pack really masterful storytelling within those few short cutscenes that they could. But then you also have the gameplay, where you play as Joel and you're trying to take down the Fireflies to save Ellie, so there's a lot more time for the narrative tension and the anticipation to build. Whereas in the show, they just took those amazing cutscenes, reenacted them, and then stitched them together to form the episode. So everything happened like one after the other, like boom, 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 and there's not enough time to sit with the characters and to absorb everything they're feeling and experiencing. So I think adding more scenes here for the show could have really helped this episode and the series overall. The creators generally have done a really fantastic job of adding in new material where it's needed to give more meat and flavor to the story, like with Bill and Frank, then Ellie and Riley, and also Henry and Sam, though I did have a few gripes about how Henry and Sam were characterized, which I discussed in my review of episode 5. But as a whole, the show's been very good at adding in new content to strengthen a scene or to flesh out a character. And I think this episode is one that really needed more of that, both for breathing room, but also to heighten the drama. Granted, the stakes are already pretty high with Ellie's life on the line, but at least in the game, the Fireflies were more threatening and there was a reason to fear them. Like playing as Joel and trying to sneak around and kill them was pretty difficult, but in the show, Joel seemed to have quite an easy time of massacring them all. Though on the other hand, I'm not sure if making Joel have a bit more of a struggle fighting the Fireflies and getting to Ellie might detract from the real drama and what the entire series has been building up to, which is ultimately Joel's morally grey choice to save Ellie at the expense of humanity. I think it's really interesting how Joel's decision has divided fans and prompted some really interesting discussions about whether he did the right thing or not, and that's what's made the game so amazing and memorable. It's been pretty apparent from the creators' perspective that how they interpret Joel's actions is that Joel did the wrong thing. And they go out of their way to make multiple references through dialogue with Marlene that Ellie, if given the choice, would have wanted to sacrifice herself to save humanity, because this would have given her life meaning. And Neil Druckmann, who wrote the game and the show, even said that when developing the game, because he became a father during this time, this inspired him when writing the story, because he realized he would do anything for his daughter. And so he wanted to explore the idea of a parent's unconditional love for their child. One of the main arguments that I hear people use to defend what Joel did is that Ellie didn't know that she had to die in order to make the vaccine, and that she wasn't given the choice of consent. Now, this is a very valid argument. Ideally, if all was right and just in this world, then Ellie would have been allowed to make that choice for herself. But that freedom is taken away from her by both Marlene and Joel. However, for the sake of the story, it had to be written this way, because if Marlene had asked Ellie beforehand, Ellie would have most likely agreed to the surgery anyway, and so Joel wouldn't really have a leg to stand on if he still interfered to save Ellie and killed all the Fireflies. And this would make his actions very unforgivable. So for the sake of the story's drama and conflict, and to keep Joel's morality ambiguous, Ellie couldn't have been given the choice of consent. Otherwise, there would be no story and no conflict to tell. Now about the Fireflies, even though I mentioned before that I think the whole confrontation with them needed to be more drawn out, I really loved the sequence when Joel went on his little killing spree. I thought the sad strings playing in the background with Joel dropping bodies like flies was done so beautifully and tragically. It's a very similar track to what they use in the game when Joel is trying to escape with Ellie. I also like that the show took on a different tone to the game in this scene and clearly paints Joel in a more morally grey light than in the game. Like when Joel doesn't hesitate and mercilessly kills a person who has already surrendered. So I preferred how they framed Joel's actions here in the show. And I think this is much harder to pull off in the game because when you're playing, you're so preoccupied trying to sneak around and kill the Fireflies that you see them simply as the enemy that you have to take out. But when watching this play out in the show, you're a lot more removed as the audience, and so it's easier to take a step back and to see the tragedy of what Joel is doing and all the bodies he's leaving behind. However, as much as I loved that scene, I was also a little disappointed with the scene after that when Joel is carrying Ellie out of the hospital. To me, this was the most powerful and emotional scene in the game because you have that same sad strings music playing in the background and the red lights are flashing everywhere and the Fireflies are coming after you and you're trying to find your way out of the hospital while holding Ellie and the Fireflies begin shooting at you too. And it's all just very overwhelming and tense and impactful and you feel a degree of panic even. And it's also such a strong callback to the beginning with Sarah when Joel was carrying her just before they were shot at and Sarah died. And this was my favorite scene in the game, so I was really disappointed when they left this out of the show and just had Joel carry Ellie to the elevator quite quickly. One thing that they added in this episode, which I thought was done extremely well, was Ellie's mum, which is played by Ashley Johnson, the original Ellie. I just really love her voice and it was so nostalgic hearing her and it made me miss Ellie from the game. I thought it was also really interesting that they gave a reason for why Ellie is immune and I wonder if this will be raised again in later seasons about possible ways to fight against the cordyceps. I also really appreciated seeing Marlene and Anna's friendship at the beginning because it's only touched on in the game and isn't really shown. And I thought the dialogue between them at the start was also very poignant and touching, with Anna asking Marlene to kill her and to take Ellie. One minor thing I wanted to mention about this scene though is how easily Ellie is born. And I'm just wondering how realistic this is, because Anna is fighting off an infected while giving birth, and she manages to kill the infected, and then Ellie just simply comes out immediately after. And maybe this is possible, or maybe Anna was already in labor for quite a while beforehand, but it just seemed a little unrealistic to me. But then I know essentially nothing about midwifery, so if you have any ideas about how this works, please let me know in the comments below. I think Joel and Ellie's scenes together were done very well this episode too. It was very sweet seeing Ellie moping around and being very quiet because she's still dealing with everything she went through last episode, but Joel's there trying to cheer her up. And you can see that he's really embraced his relationship and devotion to Ellie at this point, and it's exactly where he needs to be for everything in the finale to go down as it did. I thought the conversation where he tells Ellie that he tried to kill himself after Sarah died and that Ellie is the reason that this wound has healed somewhat, as opposed to time, was a really nice addition to the show that wasn't in the game. It felt almost like a confession, and it was a very heartfelt and touching moment. So overall, I thought this episode was very well done, but I think it would have benefited from being a little longer and having a few more scenes during the hospital sequence. Now, looking at the entire season as a whole, I think it was a very solid adaptation of the game, and certainly one of the best game to television adaptations there is. The performances from all the actors were extremely strong, the show looked amazing, and there were some fantastic additions to the storyline and the characters and their backstories. In terms of Bella Ramsey, I think she did an amazing performance and she's a really good actor. However, even to the end, I still found her characterization of Ellie very different to the game. And this is nothing to do with her appearance, but it's all about her vibe and her energy and her personality. To me, the show's Ellie and the game's Ellie just felt like very different people. The game Ellie just felt more innocent, and there was a sense of wonder and curiosity and playfulness about her. And that's not to say that Bella Ramsey's Ellie doesn't have this as well. She does have these traits, but it just comes off in a very different kind of vibe. But that being said, maybe Bella Ramsey's Ellie might be more well suited for what's in store for season 2. In terms of the structure and the storytelling of season 1, I think there were some pacing issues, mostly in the last 2 episodes, which I think needed to be longer or told over a few episodes. I'm not sure why, but I also found myself getting more and more disappointed with the series as it went on, which was a huge bummer for me because I really wanted to love the show, and I know how much the creators wanted to do a really good job of it. And I think they did, but it just didn't go that extra mile for me. I think each episode, when taken by itself in a vacuum, is very well written because they're mostly self-contained stories. But when you look at how each episode fits together as a whole, the story just wasn't all that engaging or compelling. And perhaps it is because I've already played the game and it was quite recently, so I knew what was coming and I didn't get to experience the joy of discovering the story for the first time and how everything unfolds. I've also already mentioned this in multiple previous reviews, but I also think that there needed to be more infected and more action scenes. I can appreciate that the creators wanted to mainly focus on the human relationships and the human drama, but again, since we're in a zombie apocalypse world and humanity is in a pretty dire state, the infected should have been used a lot more. Not just for action and adrenaline and excitement, but also as a tool to heighten the human drama and remind the audience of what's at stake. For example, in this finale episode, which is all about whether Ellie should die to create a vaccine to save humanity, if there had been more scenes to show how terrifying the infected are and what a terrible state humanity is in currently, then it would create a more compelling argument for Ellie to be sacrificed for the sake of humanity. That being said, I'm still really thankful that a show like The Last of Us exists, as well as the games, because they're all written extremely well and explore very interesting themes. And I especially love how the second game is a great lesson in empathy, so I'm very much looking forward to seeing how this plays out in season 2. And most of all, I love the diverse cast of characters. I love the number of queer characters there are, as well as characters of color. And I love that they are all complex, well-rounded, relatable, and well-written. And they're not just one-dimensional characters and who are simply in the story for representation or for whatever tokenistic reasons there are. And this also goes for the female characters. I really dislike when female characters are just there to support the male character's story and growth, and they aren't given as much development or thought. So it's really clear that the creators of The Last of Us respect their characters and try to do them all justice, no matter what their gender or race or sexual orientation is. So in that regard, this show is one of the rare ones that ticks all my boxes. And for that, I'm extremely grateful that it even exists. So that's it on my thoughts for The Last of Us. Thank you so much for watching and following me on this journey, and please like the video if you did. I will continue to post weekly reviews on the shows that I watch. I like a pretty broad range of genres, but as I alluded to before, things that typically catch my interest are anything queer related, or that have well-written and complex female leads, or that subvert gender norms and expectations, or are just overall well done and compelling stories. So if those kinds of themes or stories interest you, please consider subscribing and feel free to leave me any recommendations on shows that you like in the comments below. So until next time, take care and I'll see you when I see you.